I've seen organizations spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars on tools that are supposed to change their lives for the better, and they often don't because of lack of adoption or the requirements might not have been clear early on. That adoption piece is fundamental in any of those deployments that you do. But in order to get to that point, you really have to listen to the people in it because it may not be the right approach.
Quick favor before we jump in. It always surprised me that a large percentage of people who listen to the show regularly haven't yet subscribed. If you're a commercial real estate operator, investor, or builder who values conversations like this around deals, capital, and technology, please take 2 seconds and hit subscribe. It's a simple, free way to support the show. My commitment to you is that my team and I will continue bringing you higher level operators, stronger conversations, and real execution level insights every single week. Thank you. I truly appreciate it. Welcome back to the AI Edge podcast, where we have real conversations with operators, founders, and leaders who are building systems that actually work in the real world, not just in theory. Today's episode is about why most organizations don't fail because of tools, why they fail because of their processes never evolve, especially in regulated environments. My guest today is Santiago Cortés, founder and CEO of Lab Cortex. Santiago helps regulated and mission-driven organizations simplify operations, stay audit-ready, and scale intelligently through process-first design, automation, and AI with governance. This is not about chasing tools. It's about clarity, control points, and building systems that hold up when regulators knock at the door. Santiago, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lewis. I appreciate you having me on.
Excellent, Santiago. I'm happy for you to be here. Santiago, for people hearing you for the very first time, walk us through your journey. How did you move from deep operational roles into founding Lab Cortex?
Sure. So I started, my original academic career started in the arts. And from there, I made the transition into finance, which ultimately led me into operations through mortgage servicing. So I have a fair amount of experience on the mortgage servicing side, doing ops for them, figuring out ways how to improve processes. That ultimately led to starting Lab Cortex. I saw the need that it's not always the tools that help get you where you need to go, but it's really the process that really enables that, right? So through that journey, I discovered that I really like operations. Like that's become my jam at this point. I love identifying and tinkering through the process, identifying areas of opportunity, looking at ways to make things more effective and efficient. And through that, that's where I came up with Lab Cortex. I've been consulting individually Lab Cortex for a number of years. In the last couple of years, we've started building our team much larger and developing out our process in a more scalable way. That's where we're at, or how quickly we made it to this point at this. With the operations itself, or Lab Cortex in general, taking into your theme into account, the tools are immensely helpful, right? Without the tools, we can't go through the work faster. But if we're leveraging the tools incorrectly because the process isn't aligned with it, we're often going to get the wrong outcome, right? So that's a lot of the work that we do. So we don't prescribe to a particular tool. We really just start by listening. Why are you doing what you're doing? What's the goal of your organization? And a lot of times when we go through the process with individuals asking them these pieces, we get a really colorful story around why we do it, because it's either always been done this way or because we haven't had time to get to it, or a number of other reasons, right? Through that, the key in that is really listening and understanding what they're saying and what they're not saying, right? Every system has incentives and disincentives through it. And you see that in the processes themselves, the way that people approach certain things, the way that things ultimately come through the pipeline, either a product or a service, whatever your organization mission is. So we spend a lot of time understanding that And then based on that, we figure out what the next layers are, right? So a lot of the work that we do is in pretty regulated industries. We're talking biotech, life sciences, banking. And then in those areas, there's a huge need for compliance. We need to be able to be audited by whatever regulatory entity there is out there. We need to be able to see where the process is going. We need to see the performance overall, right? And so there's always this friction between compliance and the people trying to do the work and the sales team, and everybody's trying to kind of get together, but they're always pushing into each other in that sense. I've learned through this that you really need to incorporate compliance early on as a pillar in the approach of how you take the organization in general, right? If you do that really early, you will save a lot of time, right? Because if the team is constantly compliance first, everything falls in line, right? They're there to provide guardrails. And once you have the guardrails, once everybody understands the rules of the process, people can move a lot faster. I often hear, the sales team saying, "Hey, the compliance team is holding us back. We're trying to move faster. We're trying to do all these things." A lot of times they get themselves in trouble when they try to do that, right? So like that's part of what we try to accomplish. And then many times we either build custom solutions for them through the Power Platform, or we re-engineer the tech stack or reorganize what they already have. It really depends on the organization individually.
What did your years in mortgage servicing and regulated operations teach you that most consultants miss?
Most consultants miss the listening part, I would say. You come in and it's tough where you do the work for a really long time and you're very, skilled at it, right? So you already know you just got to do X, Y, and Z and you're going to be good to go. That's a mistake because while it may be effective in the ultimate outcome of what you're trying to accomplish, you're missing part of the organization, right? They got to this point not necessarily because they don't have the capacity to understand that there's a better approach to this. It could be a fundamental difference in how they approach the work, right? So, two organizations within the same vertical, within the same industry, within the same service or product, right? They're going to do it differently, even if it's the same exact thing. Each company is going to do it differently because they have different people within it and they have different structures and cultures within it, right? That part's really important because if you're building to one type of style, you're going to miss what's more effective for this team. So I've seen organizations spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars on tools that are supposed to change their lives for the better, and they often don't because of lack of adoption or the requirements might not have been clear early on. That adoption piece is fundamental in any of those deployments that you do, right? But in order to get to that point, you really have to listen to the people in it because it may not be the right approach. So I think part of it is taking a step back and saying, yes, I have this knowledge of all of these things that we did in the past. These have been beneficial to us, but I'm open to listening to hear if there's something else that I may be missing, right? So I think that in general, beyond just the mortgage servicing and operations, I think that's an important key as part of any consultant.
Santiago, when did you realize that tools weren't the real problem?
Very early on. So actually part of that process where I transitioned into operations, I had actually built an app for the team that we were working in, and I presented it to the management team and I said, the problem here is not so much that you don't have places to do this, it's just the amount of work that it takes to accomplish it, right? And then with that tool, I realized that it also wasn't the tool that was the issue, it was the people that put it together and how they implement it, right? So pretty early on, I realized that it's really more a culture and process item.
You said something really that stuck with me. Most organizations try to scale by brute force, just adding more people. Why does
Yeah.
that fail so often?
It's gonna work early on, right? When you're all hands on deck, we really gotta accomplish X, Y, and Z. Everybody's pushing to the limit. Early on, you're gonna get some initial results. The problem is that that's not sustainable, right? So that's not a scalable solution for that, not just because of the cost overhead of each individual employee, but also the toll that it takes on the morale of the team, on the throughput of the process itself. Adding more people may give you temporary solution to the problem, but ultimately, you have an infrastructure issue. You have a fundamental problem with the process itself, if that's the case. With all the tools that we have available to us at this point, the huge explosion of AI over the last couple of years, and even the last, a couple quarters, how much greater it's become in its capacity. Tools like that, bunch of a lot of other smaller tools that can help organize teams. There's a lot of things that people can do to organize and automate, right? So it's really more focusing on that as opposed to throwing 300 people at a process. Try to automate it. That's a better effective way of both the money and time, right?
What does it look like operationally when it starts breaking?
You hear it in the people's responses to the work. You see it in the performance of the team itself. You also see it in the way that the customers interact, both internal and external customers, right? You see it in many, many areas where that stress materializes in performance drops, right? And key in that again, you have to listen to these things, right? So it's like, the old ear to the ground to hear like the coming bison or something like that, right? That's a real thing in processes themselves, right? They all have different signs and different ships leak differently, but it's listening in that sense that can help you understand what they are and then ultimately find where they're coming from to fix them.
How do you spot when a team has outgrown their workflow?
So the workflows is pretty in that sense. So take into account, let's take an example of a team is trying to create a solution for, let's say, call automation, for example, right? They spent a fair amount of time creating some automations and getting outbound calls, getting some of the feedback back. But in that particular process, they don't have a good enough feedback loop, right? So they're not effectively knowing if the process is effective, right? It's just going out. It's not necessarily an end piece, right? In those scenarios where you see something like that, that's partly an incomplete process, right? But they outgrew it because they accomplished their initial piece of, hey, I just need to get these calls out. But that's not the whole part of it, right? So constantly taking that time to take the step back and saying, look, we really need to be thoughtful about what this looks like in the future. And regular conversations about that are important in any organization, but really important when you're trying to generate effectiveness and efficiency through your entire system, right? Taking that step back, always looking at what you're doing, why you're doing it. Is there a better approach to doing it? Those kind of things are really important. And that's really tough to do when you're running on 100 miles per hour, trying to shut down every single fire that's coming your way, right? So you have to build into that time for those things. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself in the same situation down the road.
You describe many organizations as running on a hybrid of hopes, duct tape, and extra hours. That's painfully accurate. What signals tells you a process needs to be rebuilt, not optimized?
Good example you gave earlier, throwing, 300 people into a process just to get that initial push through, right? That's a really good example of we need to rethink this, right? You can't hire 300 people for, a seasonal type of situation as a long-term solution. So that's a good one. Another one is people, there's always going to be work is work, right? So it's not always going to be pleasant. It's not always going to be, rainbows and unicorns out of it, but there are a lot of things where you can see there's major friction in trying to accomplish something, right? If you hear that from the team, if you're seeing those kind of pieces, you know that something needs to be changed, right? If they're like, the an example would be like a month end accounting, right? That's always a mission for large organizations with a lot of transactions. Just the reconciliation process is pretty heavy, right? There's a lot of tools in this that now can automatically reconcile, that can help alleviate that. And it's really more just a validation than an actual doing of it, right? Those kind of things, when you're looking at where is the best place for this individual to spend their time, what's going to generate the most value, and where do they waste most of their time, right? So when you ask teams and individuals within these teams about those pieces, you have I waste my time on X, Y, and Z on a regular basis. And most of the value that I add is on, A, B, and C type pieces. When you listen through that, a lot of times you can find that there's similarities between one and the other, but a lot of times they're very different. And when you're getting that from them, you can see, again, going back to structurally how you're established as the organizational structure, your infrastructure itself, or the process itself, your tech stack, and things like that. Find a lot of opportunities within that. But if you're wasting a lot of time, if you have a lot of frustration, if you have to spend a lot of money to get from point A to point B, just because there's not everything's really manual. Those are high level indications that there's issues with that process.
How does low confidence in a workflow show up across teams?
In a very similar way, right? Low confidence in the workflow would be, oh, I'm not, we have this process, but we have to redouble check it and then triple check it and then quadruple check it because we just don't believe that it's accurate. Um, you see a lot of that in transposing information, right? A paper to digital, or validating the work that other members of the team have done, right? So in a lot of that, there's a big waste, right, across the board in that sense. But those are good pieces where you see the front end process really needs to be addressed. Otherwise, the lack of confidence in that is going to continue to happen.
That, Santiago. One thing I respect about your approach is you don't blindly map everything. You decide based on maturity. So, how do you decide when to lightly map current state versus fully documenting reality?
It really depends on what the approach is with the organization, right? So there's certain scenarios where we are pretty clear that what we're doing is incorrect, and we really need to kind of consider a new process. There's a lot of gaps in there. We're missing a lot of pieces. In that scenario, we would say, okay, well, let's lightly map what we're looking at to understand and then we can figure out from there, what the future state really should include, right? High level, we see we're missing X, Y, and Z. We should incorporate a little bit more of that. In the scenario where it's a very structured organization, has a lot of pieces there, though that may require much more thorough review of the process itself, right? It's a lot of dependencies, a lot of items moving, variables moving in and out of that. We want to ensure that we're fully mapping that out to understand where we need to move them from there, right? Particularly if they're tied to a particular tech stack, right? That would be a good indication of we really need to understand this very well before we move forward, and then provide a um, um, potential solution for where we move from there. Re-engineering, just basic process improvement, or maybe designing the whole tech stack and how we approach that.
Why does skipping that step create chaos later?
The review process and the mapping. Oh well, I mean, if you don't know what you have, you're always going to be build wrong to it, right? If you take the time, you take at at a previous leader of mine, mentor, said, take the 100 extra seconds up front, and you'll save yourself 100 extra hours on the back end, right? It's something to that tune. It's really easy to just say, all right, I'm just going to do it, move forward, and then go from there, right? You just got to do what you got to do depending on what's on your plate, right? But doing that, a lot of times, if it's not clear what the goal is, or what you fully need to accomplish within it, it's just going to add a lot more work at the end. And then the rework is always more expensive. It's expensive in time, it's expensive in resources, monetary, and personnel, right? So just taking the time to really map it out and understand can help a lot of organizations in that sense.
A lot of firms lead with the platform Power by, Copilot, Power Automate? You don't. Why?
I don't start with well, that's a tool that we regularly use. It's not, we don't subscribe to it as like the one and all, right? It really has to start with the process. They may not need something like that, right? They may have everything that they need. But if we're coming on site, it's already, that's a good indication that they need the help, right? They're saying, hey, something's wrong with our process. We're really ineffective. We're really inefficient. We're wasting money left and right. We had to bring in more people, but now we got to downsize because we don't have the capacity to sustain this kind of work. The platform's not going to change that, right? In the same way that, the standard like Salesforce of the sorts, right? They're not going to make that sale for you, right? They're going to help you manage that sale. So if you start with the application, you may miss the actual point of what they're trying to accomplish, right? You have to start with the process first and then move into what that may be. Like, I'm a big fan of the Power Platform. It's very flexible. It's low code. It's low education bar to entry, right? You take a class over a weekend, you could probably do a lot of stuff on it throughout the week, right? And we like that as a tool for a lot of organizations because it's dynamic and it moves with their process. It's not the only tool. There's a lot of tools out there that do similar items, right? It's just one that we really enjoy on our side.
Santiago, what breaks when automation is layered into unclear ownership?
Everything breaks, and in a lot of ways, right? Where you're having, if you don't know who needs to ultimately complete certain processes, you'll have orphan processes sitting out there. You'll get, a notification from a regulatory entity that, hey, we were supposed to receive X, Y, and Z report at the end of this year or at the end of this quarter. We received none of that. So clear guidance as to who needs to do it is really important, and making sure that that information is available to everyone is also really important, right? You may have really good processes that are really structured. You only have one person that's doing it, and then that person leaves the company for whatever reason. What do you do at that point, right? That knowledge base is incredibly important to also transfer. So part of this listening, process first, design tools afterwards, that all incorporates that transfer of knowledge, incorporates keeping track of those updates and managing that in a way that anybody else can come on and understand it and move forward with it. But yeah, if you don't have clear guidance at the beginning, you're just going to be lost through the process, and it's going to again cost a lot at the end of it.
What should leaders fix before they even think about AI?
Do you have a clear process? That's number one, right? We spent a fair amount of time playing with AI tools on our side well before we decided to actually incorporate it into the solutions that we enable. And it's mainly because, what's the use case? How effective is it? What are we trying to really accomplish with it? There's always that I don't know what I don't know type of piece where you're just, searching, seeing what opportunities it could do. That type of exploration is really important, those kind of tools. But you shouldn't just say, I'm going to start a company today and I'm just going to throw everything in AI and it's going to be perfect if you don't even know what you need, right? So you really need to start with the process in general.
Love that. This is the AI Edge podcast, and we treat AI as leverage, not magic. Where do you see
Love
AI
that.
creating real value today in regulated environments?
I see it creating a lot of value in everything. Anything that incorporates in the process, there's opportunity in a lot of that, right? Example, validation of health information, right? Is this correct? Yes. Flag any things that are incorrect so a user could come and take a look at it and validate on a certain level, right? Those preliminary reviews historically have taken a person, right? So if you add some of these layers into it, you can reduce the amount of people that have to do that process. You won't be able to do that in every situation, right? Certain things just require that human touch. But there's a lot of pieces that you can bring a lot of benefit there, right? So automation, a great way to do it, right? If you're trying to do on the sales side some outbound calls and things of this sort, a fair amount of that, right? You can make a lot of that happen, right? You upfront scheduling, communication type of that piece, right? With some of the back end processes, and this is like across the board, regulated or non-regulated, right? It's really more like, do you have the one, does the team understand exactly what's happening here, right? Do they have a process for it? More likely than not, we'll be able to automate most of it, right? And then through that, we can make a lot of benefits, right? And so it's really across the board that there could be benefits. It could be benefits in what I spoke about earlier, reconciliation of financial data, of validation of health information, of keeping up with the client or the customer on the back end to see if, hey, did we do correct? And if not, actually make modifications in the systems to ensure that these things are being put into account, right? So there's a lot of benefits across the board that can happen. It's really more, what's the use case? Is there a proper funnel or workflow for that? And then that you can go from that piece.
Can you share an example where AI enhanced speed without compromising compliance?
Yeah, there's a fair amount of examples. I mean, in the one that we just mentioned about validation of health information, right? The one of the models that we had built to kind of go through the process, it's I think like 200 plus individual data points. It will go through that analysis, identify whether there's issues, data inputs are incorrect, maybe this is something that needs to be flagged. And as I mentioned, in that particular process, there was another person that did that manually, right? So it goes through this entire process, identifying each individual one of those fields. It generates a report based on that, and it actually tracks every single piece that was validated and what the outcome is, right? And then pushes it on to the next person if there is a piece that needs to be validated or just an approval of the overall process, right? So in that sense, you're taking the validation of that data set, you're generating a report that's traceable, you're keeping track of it from a data perspective on the back end where you can see what was actually done and when. And then you're having that secondary validation by the user if need be, depending on the scenario. That's a good example of opportunities there.
The most leaders underestimate about the audit readiness.
They think it's really just more like an end of year or end of quarter or whenever the auditor shows up type of piece. That's a mistake where it's just going to cost you a lot of time and energy, right? If you're scrambling because the CFPB is coming or the FDA or whatever the situation may be, right? You really need to have a process built up front that's ready to audit. And it's not so much for, partly is the outcome of being able to for an entity to come and take a look at it, right? That's obviously mission critical and you can't move without that. But it's also really important for the team within themselves, right? If they don't know what's happening, how it's happening, then there's never an opportunity or a clear opportunity for them to say, hey, I keep getting X, Y, and Z, but I should be getting one, two, and three. Why is this happening, right? So being audit ready does not necessarily mean that you're going to be, it's not specific to the regulatory entities. It's also for your internal process to help identify areas of opportunity, to identify efficiency. There's a lot of there's a lot more than just I passed my audit and I'm good to go.
Let's talk about the other side, Santiago. Where does AI become dangerous in regulated settings?
You don't have a clear process. You decide that AI should do that process. You get audited, and then they find out that you didn't follow the rules that were supposed to be followed, and now you're losing your license to work as an organization, right? That's a good place, where AI could be immensely problematic. So being a regulated space, you have to be really thoughtful about those guardrails, right? If you don't build that into AI tools, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble early on, right? Now with sending like telemarketers and things like that automated, but like every day I get maybe about 8 to 10 of those, right? And they'll call me. Simultaneous to that, I get a voicemail, and then I also get a text message on that same moment, right? So I get three, yeah, every time. Kudos to them because they built something really like it's really good, right? Super annoying though, because it's just, it's like, hey, we are giving roof inspections, call us back, or something like that. And in those particular scenarios with AI in general, right? The spamming, or if you take maybe a more nefarious character that's like shooting it out there like, oh hey, we are giving you a loan and you just have to fill out this last couple pieces, you've already been pre-approved or something of the sort, right? That could be immensely problematic in a space like a mortgage servicing or something like that, or just in general, right? So there's like any other tool, it depends on how you use it, right? Gunpowder can make fireworks or it can make bullets, right? So it really depending on the implementations. That's something that really needs to be thought out, and it's not just unique to regulated spaces. It's really across the board wherever you're using it.
They call me every single day. Every day my phone
Yeah,
it's like $150,000 you're been approved for, and I'm like, "Can you please just take me off the list?" I mean, please.
it's really terrible.
They're very thorough. They're incredibly thorough. They don't give up,
I know. I
and they use
know.
different numbers every single time.
Yeah. No, I at this point I don't even block them anymore because I know it's just going to be, another one, and it is what it is at this point.
What risks do you see with organizations moving faster than their controls?
There may not be initial risks, right? You may not see the things breaking, people aggravated about the process. You may see real movement early on. If you're not thoughtful about the scalability of your process, if you're not thoughtful about the outcomes or the how you accomplish some of these things, you're gonna get yourself into a lot more work than necessary because you'll have to go back and you're already moving so fast. It's much harder to do that, right? So taking that time up front or having a separate team parallel to you doing that really helps get you to the next layer, right? A lot of times, organizations may not have the people to do that kind of work, right? And it's not that they don't have the right sets. It's really more of a capacity piece, right? If you're a growing organization where your tech team is an army of one and your sales team is an army of 100, that one tech person's not going to be able to accomplish that for the sales team, or if it's a product development team or something like that, right? Well, as you're moving through that, you really need to be thoughtful about, okay, let's take at least a person to spend some time taking a look at this, or bring an organization like ours, or like yours, to come in and say, hey, we're really gonna help you get to this next stage, and while you're running as fast as you can in the other one, I'm moving this other lane, trying to ensure that we're building this road for you so you can keep running, right? So it's really important that you take that time.
What guardrails need to exist before adaptation?
There needs to be clear guidance as to what the outcome is, right? If it's a really vague, like, hey, we just gotta make this next quarter really successful, you can't build a process around that, right? What does success mean? And then success within a team is different as well, right? So just clear guidance, take the time to really understand what you're really trying to accomplish, and take the time to see where the variables could be problematic for you. And then we can go from there much faster.
Santiago, you made a strong point that governance can actually enable speed. How does good compliance design reduce friction instead of creating it?
In the same piece that we just talked about, right? So if upfront you are clear as to what the guardrails are, you're clear as to what the mission and the requirements are, you can go a lot faster, right? Because if not, if there's always this like tug of war between one team and the other, you're adding a lot of friction between the people. You're adding a lot of friction between the process. And ultimately, your output is going to cost you more to make that happen. If everybody is clear, hey, we can only accomplish this if these seven things are met, that's clear guidance across the board. We could do anything we want, but we gotta hit these seven items, right? As long as we're that, we can go a lot faster. So clear guidance at the beginning, and in the same way as the previous career that you had, right? That's really going to help the teams move faster. A lot of times it's just one compliance person that's going back, or like a very small team to a very large production team doing that, right? So they get put to the side because they're the afterthought of the process, right? Those are the people we want to bring in the process at the beginning, because they're there to help you be successful as an organization, right? They're not, their goal is not to prevent you from doing work. They just want to ensure you're not getting sued or your company doesn't fall apart afterwards, right? So if people take that mindset early on in the process, how can we be as effective and efficient as possible while ensuring that we meet these criterias? It's going to help you go a lot faster through this process. And incorporating them early on gives you different perspective as well, where you could say, they could say, hey, I know you got to meet these 7 things, but you only have to do it every other day, right? So like, oh, okay, so every other day we just book it, right? So things like that.
What's the mindset shift that leaders need to make?
Well, I mean, it depends on the individual leader, right? And the goal of the organization itself. And as it relates to the type of work that I do, ask those questions, take your time early up front, and be thoughtful about the scalability of your process, right? As a leader in whether you're a team, whether it's a company, whatever level you're at in that process, taking the time to really um, understand what's really happening can really help you move forward faster, right? So it's really easy to get bogged down where I just got work, I got to do all these things, I got to move forward. Take the time up front, really look at what's happening, and then that's really going to help you down the road.
You deliver operations as a service. Why does that model resonate in complex environments?
So in the example that I gave earlier, where there's 100 production or sales people, and then the one IT person, right? What we do is we try to become embedded with a team. Our goal is to be there as a resource for you, as if we were part of your team, right? So it's not just overflow capacity. It's really more of, we are here to ensure that we are generating value for you on a regular basis, that your processes are moving as best as possible, right? So that model works for us and the organizations that we work with, because it really helps us become part of it, right? It helps us grow, and as the organization grows, and understand their needs. And a lot of the things that we do is not a one and go type piece, right? Your systems, your people, everything's a living, breathing process, right? So those need constant reviews and analysis to ensure the overall structure may be, may have been made efficient after our initial solution and things of the sort, right? But as the business grows, new business lines, new regulations, whatever that may be, right? That constant review of what's happening in the industry helps grow it in that sense.
How do you measure success beyond just automated delivered?
How happy people are. If they're like, "Gosh, you saved me 300 hours a month, across my team," right? That's a big win for us,
It's
right?
huge.
That's because it's not just it's a tangible benefit for the individuals. That's where part of that success for us is, right? We have the very specific criteria for whatever solution we're doing, right? So we need to accomplish X. These are kind of the requirements around that. So there's those tangible or items that can be quantified in that sense, right? But also taking into account how the people say like, wow, I did this every Friday and I hated Fridays because of it. And now my Friday is the easiest day of my day, right? Those are really big. Those are the kind of things that we strive to ensure that we're generating on a regular basis.
Beautiful. Looking ahead 2 to 3 years, what will separate teams that scale cleanly from those that just stall?
Whether they're in business or not. 3 years is a fairly long time for new organizations. They may not make it if you're not thinking about that up front, right? And you can have a very large team. Being new doesn't necessarily mean small, right? So the if you're not thoughtful about those things early on, you're gonna spend a lot of wheels, you're gonna spend a lot of money, you're going to have a lot of aggravation, long days. really thinking about that. At the end of the day, work is work, right? So we still have to do that grind, and there's a lot of pieces that have to be put together and ensure that makes that happen, right? But if you're not thoughtful about those pieces, you may not be in business at the end of those 3 years.
What skills will operators need that they don't prioritize today?
Technology skills are big piece that people are often putting a big emphasis on. One of the things that we do internally is that I'll give you an example of our solutions developers, right? They're technically inclined, right? They have a lot of skills in development work and in a series of different specialties. Every time we bring in a developer and we're talking to them, we also try to encompass the other part of it, right? Just because you know how to technically create a solution doesn't mean that you can create a good solution, right? So you have to be thoughtful about the other variables within that, right? So for our solutions developers, we try to instill a lot of information around what a good process looks like, how to listen, where areas of opportunity there are, right? So it's like there's an emphasis on their technical skills because that's what we need, right? But that's only part of the process. We need them to be great listeners, to be able to articulate potential problems, right? Those are soft skills that are complementary and necessary, fundamental in order for you to accomplish that, right? So when I think about organizations in general, everyone's like, "Oh, we're gonna get this new AI person. They're gonna like solve our life, and it's gonna be great." That person needs to be capable of listening. There needs to be some level of like empathy or understanding of this is the struggles that they go to daily basis. That's ultimately going to be more beneficial, right? So yes, you need those technical skills, but that's only part of it. Like you want that, like the old military or army saying, like an army of one type of piece. Like they should be able to do a fair amount of things because the higher the floor is for all of your team members, the better across the board the organization is going to be.
Fantastic. Let's do a little rapid fire. All right.
Okay.
One process mistake you see everywhere.
Excel.
Why is that?
I love Excel. I think Excel is fantastic. I've done a lot of work of Excel. The Excel is not a system of record. I see that very regularly. Teams just want to build things on Excel. It's not really good as a database, right? It shouldn't be set as a database, right? Most teams believe, and it's really more, I think, is partly is practice, but it's also that they may not have another solution, right? So, Excel to Microsoft List, for example, List can keep audit. It could say this is the version history. That's a good transition from one to the other. You can't do heavy calculations in Microsoft List, but that's a piece that we see pretty regularly, right? So it's really more you're wasting a lot of time in a process that really doesn't have a solid structure in a tool that really isn't meant for that, right? So the Excel one is an example, but I see misuse of tools pretty regularly. Hey, I just figured out how to do this one thing in this one solution, and I think it's going to solve all our stuff. So they put a lot of efforts on this one solution, not really meant for that, right? And then so we go back to the same piece about the duct tape and hopes. Yeah, this is going to make it happen, and at the end of the day, it doesn't. It's not built for that, right? So using the tools for what they're supposed to be is a big one.
Nice. Most overrated productivity tool, but you can't use Excel.
Most overrated productivity tool. I think well, just to highlight Excel one more time. Excel is great. I love Excel. It has a lot of value. But the most overrated one, I would say, I don't know. I mean, at this point, AI is like a double-edged sword, right? Because it could be immensely valuable and productive for you. But if you know what you're asking for, right, it could give you a wrong direction, right? So in that sense, there's a potential of you not actually being productive in that way.
One metric every regulated team should track.
One metric, everything. So in general, I would say it switches between finance to healthcare and kind of things like that. There's specific different type of metrics in that sense. But overall, if you allocate a particular score to your process, you can identify how effective that process is, right? So in general, trying to establish a metric like that would probably be beneficial across the board, right? The independent of what organization you are.
Best advice you've received in operations.
Best advice. So I had a tendency to make things really complicated. And not because that was the goal, but it was, I wanted to be very specific and very clear about what the overall piece is. Solutions, and I had seen a quote about this many years ago. I'm not sure who wrote it. A solution can either be so complicated that it accomplishes what you're trying to do, or so simple that it accomplishes what you're trying to do, right? And it's really more approach. Uh, the goal here for us is adoption. The goal here is transparency and clarity, right? So we really try to be in that sense. And what I've learned up to this point is make it simple. Make it simple. We don't have to throw 37 different jargons into it, or, a 300-page document where that could be a single pager. It could be a small conversation. Little things make a big difference, right? It doesn't have to be a big thing all up front. So doing that helped. That's been something that's been helpful for me.
Last one. One thing leaders should stop doing immediately.
That they should stop doing immediately, thinking that a tool is going to solve every issue. It's only part of it. It's only part of the work, right? It can, and if they're built specifically for certain scenarios, absolutely, right? That can absolutely make a difference. But don't think that the new shiny thing is going to give you exactly what you're asking for if you don't even know what you're asking for, right?
Love it. Santiago, this has been a strong conversation. For people who want to follow your work, learn more about Lab Cortex, or connect with you, where's the best place to find you online?
LinkedIn. I'm on it all the time. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can check us out on our company page on LinkedIn and on our website. We're out there.
What's your website?
It's labcortex.com.
Beautiful. We'll drop those links and those in the show notes. Thank you again, Santiago, for bringing clarity to a space that's often buried in buzzwords. This has been the AI Edge podcast. If you're building a regulated environment and this episode resonated with you, share it with your leadership team. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, Santiago.
Thank you, Lewis. I appreciate your time and sharing this moment with us.